Hello, 6th graders. Welcome to Big Ideas Math, 7th grade math, section 3.2, Factoring Expressions Extension. Pause while you write the lesson title and number in your math notebook. Pause again while you write the lesson objective in your math notebook. Today's lesson objective is factor linear expressions. Copy the following vocabulary word, definition, and example into your math notebook. Factoring an expression. Factoring an expression is writing an expression as a product of factors. 5x minus 15 equals 5 times x minus 3. Today we'll be starting on page 92 in your red Go Math book. Example 1, factoring out the GCF. Factor 24x minus 18 using the GCF. Find the GCF of 24x and 18 by writing their prime factorizations. Circle the common prime factors. So 24x equals 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times x, and 18 equals 2 times 3 times 3. And you circle the common prime factors, which are 2 and 3. And then you multiply those. So the greatest common factor of 24x and 18 is 2 times 3, which equals 6. And then you're going to use the greatest common factor to factor the expression. So it says rewrite using the greatest common factor. And so 24x equals 6 times 4x, and 18 equals 6 times 3, and then there's a subtraction sign in between them, so that's what you put between them. And then 6 times 4x minus, that equals 6 times 4x minus 3. So the way I generally teach this, which is a little less cumbersome, is you know that their greatest common factor is 6, so you take a 6 and you park that outside a set of parentheses, and you go 6 times what is 24x? Well, I know that that's 6 times 4x. And 6 times what is 18? Well, I know that that's a 3. And there is a subtraction sign in between the two, so I put that in between the two. So it saves you a step, and it's still using the distributive property, and it gets you to the right answer. So 24x minus 18 equals 6 times 4x minus 3. You can also use the distributive property to factor out any rational number from an expression. So we are going to do the odd numbered practice problems together, because your even numbered practice problems are the practice for this lesson. So we are going to factor number 1 using the greatest common factor. So number 1, we know that the greatest common factor for 9 and 21 is 3. So we are going to park that outside a set of parentheses, and 3 times 3 is 9, and 3 times 7 is 21, and there's an addition sign between them, so we put that in the middle. And number 3, the greatest common factor for 8 and 2 is 2. We put that outside a set of parentheses, and 2 times 4x equals 8, and 2 times 1 is 2. There's an addition sign in the middle, so we put that in the middle. And number 5 is 20z minus 8, and the greatest common factor there is 4, and 4 times 5z equals 20z, and 4 times 2 equals 8. There's a subtraction sign in between them, so we put that in the middle. And number 7, we have 36a plus 16b, so 4 is our greatest common factor, And 4 times 9 is 9a equals 36a, and 4 times 4b equals 16b. There's an addition sign in the middle, so we put that in the middle. We are not going to do this next section yet because we haven't gotten to that in the book yet. But we can move on to number 15. It says, a square wrestling mat has a perimeter of 12x minus 32 feet. We're going to write an expression that represents the side length of the mat in feet. So we are just going to look at the greatest common factor, which is 4. So since there are 4 sides, and so we factor that out. We put the 4 outside the parentheses, and so 4 goes into 12x. 4 times 3x is 12x, and 4 times 8 is 32, and there's a subtraction sign in the middle, and then it says to write an expression that represents the side length. So this represents all the sides, and so just this part is one of the sides. So 3x minus 8 equals 1 side. So that's what they're asking for in that. Moving on to example 2, we are going to factor out a fraction. It says factor 1/2 out of 1/2 x plus 3/2. So we write each term as a product of 1/2 and another factor. So this is very similar to using greatest common factor. It's just we kind of know that 1/2 is the greatest common factor. So it says think 1/2 x is 1/2 times what? Well, 1/2 x is 1/2 times x. So then we think 3/2 is 1/2 times what? Well, it's 1/2 times 3. And then we use the distributive property to factor out 1/2, and we rewrite the expression as 1/2 times x plus 1/2 times 3. And we use the distributive property, so that means we put parentheses around it, and it comes out 1/2 times x plus 3. So 1/2 x plus 3/2 equals 1/2 times x plus 3. So we are going to practice that with our odd-numbered problems here. Number 9, 1/3 b minus 1/3 is going to equal, I'm going to pull out the 1/3, and we're going to put parentheses. So 1/3 times b is 1/3 b, and 1/3 times 1 is 1/3, and there's a parenthesis, or I'm sorry, a subtraction sign in between them. So 1/3 times b minus 1 equals 1/3 b minus 1/3. Now we're going to move on to number 11, which is not a fraction, but it is a decimal, and there is not an actual example on this one, so we're going to do it anyway. So we're going to factor 2.2x plus 4.4. So we're going to factor out the greatest common factor, which is 2.2. And so we're going to pop that on the outside of the parentheses, 2.2, and 2.2 times x equals 2.2x, and 2.2 times 2.2 equals 4.4, and there's an addition sign in the middle. So 2.2 times times x equals 2.2x, and 2.2 times 2.2 equals 4.4. So that's our answer. So we're going to wait until after our next example to do the rest of these odd problems. For example number 3, we are factoring out a negative number. So it says factor negative 2 out of negative 4p plus 10. It says write each term as a product of negative 2 and another factor. So it says think negative 4p is negative 2 times what? So negative 4p equals negative 2 times positive 2p. So negative 10 equals negative 2 times negative 5. So what they're trying to get you to think about is that if you have a negative to factor out, you always put the negative on the outside of the parentheses. So they don't actually say that, but that's what you're doing. So if you have a negative up here to factor out, you're going to put that on the outside of the parentheses. So it says use the distributive property to factor out negative 2. So negative 4p plus 10 equals negative 2 times 2p plus negative 2 times negative 5. So to make this a little bit simpler, what we're doing is we're finding the greatest common factor, which is negative 2. We're going to put that on the outside of the parentheses, and negative 2 times 2p equals negative 4p, and negative 2 times negative 5, so that's where that sign comes in, equals a positive 10, because we had a plus sign in the middle, so we want the signs to match. So that's how you get everything to equal. So remember that when you are doing these, you can always go back and check your work by using the distributive property to multiply it all back together and see if it equals what you started with. So if it does, then you got it right. So negative 4p plus 10 equals negative 2 times 2p minus 5. So let's go on to the next slide and we'll do some more practice problems. Okay, we're going to pick up on number 13. It says factor negative 1/2 out of negative 1/2 x plus 6. So you really have to pay attention to your signs here. So since we are factoring out negative 1/2, we're going to put that on the outside of the parentheses, negative 1/2, and negative 1/2 times x equals negative 1/2 x, and negative 1/2 times a negative, because a negative times a negative equals a positive, so a negative 1/2 times a negative 12 equals a positive 6. And we are going to skip number 17. As always, to complete this flipped lesson, you need to be prepared with the notes, vocabulary, and any other work from the flipped lesson completed, and any questions you have for your teacher, and as always, have a good attitude.